Hi, in this lesson we're going to get into land descriptions. And there are three types of land descriptions we're going to be talking about. The first being metes and bounds, the second being a recorded subdivision, and the third being what's called rectangular survey, also called government survey. Now, land descriptions may be brand new to just about everybody in this course. But if you take it slowly, if you take it piece by piece, especially the government survey descriptions, and you study it and you practice it, you'll be in good shape for the examination. Much of this particular lesson is actually voice-over video because there's a lot of diagrams. But at various points I'll stop the voiceover and I'll come back and talk to you a little bit. Let's get started. Let's talk about legal descriptions or land descriptions. And there are three types of legal descriptions that are used. The first is metes and bounds. The second is a recorded plat or recorded map. And the third is the rectangular survey system or the government survey system. And all three or any of these can be used to identify properties in a contract. You might remember in an earlier lesson we had talked about the fact that real property is heterogeneous. No two parcels of real estate are alike. And the courts have held that in order to have a valid contract, that a proper description of the property has to be in the contract. Now here are some surveyors, some old-time surveyors out there beginning a metes and bounds description. That a big pillar there would be referred to as a monument or a point of beginning. So what do you need for a metes and bounds description? First of all, the term metes means measurement and bounds means boundaries. And with a metes and bounds description, we're going to walk around the property verbally. You know, the oldest form of a metes and bounds description is beginning at the rock by the stream and then going to the side of the barn 400 paces away and then 300 paces south to the big oak tree and then back to the point of beginning. So in a metes and bounds description, we are verbally walking around the perimeter, the exterior of the property. And we always want to wind up back at the point of beginning. So what do we need for a metes and bounds description? We need a point of beginning. We need certain distances and directions as we walk around the property. And then we need to get back to the point of beginning, which is called closure. So that's the basics on a metes and bounds description. So here's what you want to remember about a metes and bounds description. You need a point of beginning, you need distances and directions, and you also need to close. In other words, you've got to go back to the point of beginning. You know, when I was in high school, I went to a very special high school in New York City called Brooklyn Tech, and we actually did a semester or two of surveying. It was great because we got outside of the building and we were able to survey around the building and around what's called Fort Greene Park, which was right across the street from Brooklyn Tech. Well, also in college I did some surveying because my degree is in geology and we did some plane table mapping. So land descriptions are very familiar and very easy for me, but I know they're difficult for a lot of people. Again, take it slowly. Do it carefully, and I think you'll find you'll be in good shape. The next type of description we want to talk about is a recorded plat or a recorded map, or also called a lot and block description. Now this is a pretty old subdivision map, and you can see here that each one of these blocks has different lots in it, but all these lots in the different blocks are numbered the same. So this might be block 4, and this one might be described as Lot 1, this one is Lot 2 of Block 4 of this Hanover subdivision. Today's subdivisions look a little bit different. Today's subdivisions typically have winding streets and unusually shaped lots. But regardless, what we have with a lot and block description is we have a surveyor who's mapped this area. This map is then recorded, and from that point forward, all of the properties are described by their lot and or block number within the subdivision. As a residential real estate agent, many of your descriptions will be recorded subdivision descriptions. So you don't have to worry about meets and bounds. You know, when the surveyor created the map, the surveyor actually created all the meets and bounds descriptions of these lots, but placed these lot numbers on the property. So from that point forward, you could say, this is lot 22 of this particular subdivision, and that's a sufficient legal description. If an owner ever wanted to have a survey done of her property, she would hire a surveyor who would then go to the county recorder's office and get a copy of the actual map of the subdivision, which would have the meets and bounds descriptions describing the boundaries of each of those parcels. The surveyor would then take that information from the meets and bounds description and survey the boundaries of the lot. The third one, and the one we're going to spend the most time on here today, is the government survey description, also called rectangular survey, or also called the Public Land Survey System, or PLSS. And you can imagine when Arizona was rather young, that the surveyors were wandering around the deserts and the hills of Arizona looking for a place to start, a point of beginning. So they were wandering around the desert, and they came to the intersection of the Gila and the Salt Rivers right outside of Phoenix, and they decided that's a good place to start. So, as surveyors are known to do, they started drawing some east-west and some north-south lines. And the east-west line they drew through this point of beginning is called the baseline. And many of you are familiar with Baseline Road just south of Phoenix, and it's called Baseline Road because it runs right along the baseline. The other north-south line that they drew was called the meridian. And these two lines, the baseline and meridian, intersect at the intersection of the Gila and the Salt Rivers. And they break the state down into 4 sectors or 4 quadrants. The survey is known as the Gila and Salt River Basin Meridian, Arizona, or commonly abbreviated the G and SRB&M, Arizona. And these points of reference, this baseline and meridian, are the basis for all government survey descriptions here in Arizona. If you drive out along Baseline Road west of Phoenix, what you'll come across is this permanent marker, this monument right here, which is the baseline and meridian. And if you focus on that right in the center there, you can see that big round brass head there. That looks like this. So this is the actual crosshairs. This is actually the baseline and the meridian. And you'll notice it says R1W and R1E and T1N and T1S, and then these other indications here. Well, I'm going to tell you what those are all about in just a couple of minutes. So here we are with the baseline and meridian, and what surveyors like to do is they like to draw some other lines. So what they did is they started to draw some lines in a north-south direction. And each of these lines is 6 miles apart. So every 6 miles east of the meridian, every 6 miles west of the meridian, they drew some lines. And these lines, by definition, are called range lines. And the range lines form these strips, which are 6 miles wide, and those strips of land, 6 miles wide, running north and south from the top to the bottom of the state, are called ranges. So I have a question for you. What is it called if you build a house right there where that arrow is pointed? You got it. That's a home on the range. Okay, no more of that. So ranges now are defined as a strip of land running in a north-south direction 6 miles wide. Now that we have all these ranges, let's draw some east-west lines. And every 6 miles north and south of the baseline, we're going to draw these lines. And these lines are called township lines. Township lines. And they are 6 miles apart. and you'll notice they form squares where they intersect with the range lines, and those squares, by definition, are called townships. So now what we have is we actually have an identifiable square parcel of land called a township. So here's the first parcel we can define. A township, by definition, is a parcel of land 6 miles by 6 miles. That means 6 miles square, bordered on the north and south by township lines and on the east and west by range lines. The area of a township would be determined by multiplying 6 times 6, so the area of a township is 36 square miles. So make this distinction. When you see the term 6 miles square, that means a parcel that's square in shape, 6 miles on each side. Area is indicated by square miles or square feet or square inches. So the area of a township is 36 square miles. Now let's go about identifying these townships uniquely. So you'll notice that this township is the first township north of the baseline. But if you take a look at the other townships in this same what is called a tier, all of these are also in the first township north of the baseline. So T1N, standing for Township 1 North, does not uniquely identify that particular parcel. So aside from designating it by the township number, we also designate it by the range number. So this particular township lies in the first range east of the meridian. Therefore, we designate this township as Township 1 North, first one north of the baseline, and Range 1 East, first range east of the meridian. So that township can be uniquely identified as Township 1 North, Range 1 East of the Gila and Salt River Basin Meridian, Arizona. In order to identify each of these townships, what we do is we indicate how far north or south of the baseline each of the townships are. That's the T or township designation, and they lie either north or they lie south of the baseline. Then what we do is we indicate which range they're in by indicating how far east, how many ranges east, or how many ranges west of the meridian that parcel happens to be. So let's do a few of these here. How about that one? Let's define that one. Can you define that particular parcel right up here? Starting with the township designation, just count. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it over here. Let's count. 1, 2, 3. It's 4 townships north of the baseline, and it is how many ranges east of the meridian? It's the first, second range. So this particular parcel right here would be indicated as Township 4 North, Range 2 East of the Gila and Salt River Basin Meridian, or Township 4 North, Range 2 East of the G and SR, B and M, Arizona. Let's try another one. How about this one here? Okay, so how far is it, north or south of the baseline? Well, it's north of the baseline, and how many spaces north? 1, 2, 3 spaces north, so that would be Township 3 North, and it lies 1, 2, 3 ranges west of the meridian, so it's Range 3 West. Therefore, we can indicate that one as Township 3 North, Range 3 West. Let's do another one. All right, down here in the southeast quadrant, that one is how many townships south of the baseline? Here's our baseline. It's 1, 2 south of the baseline. And how far east of the meridian in it? It's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces east. So that parcel is Township 2 South, Range 4 East of the GNSR B&M. All right, one more. So this one is south of the baseline. How many townships south? 1, 2 south. And how many ranges west? 1, 2 west. So that parcel is Township 2 South, Range 2 West of the GNSR B&M. All right, so literally we have actually over 1,000 of these townships around the state. and they are indicated by the township and range number. So what do you call an east-west row of townships? Well, as I mentioned before, it's referred to as a tier. Just think of a tier in a football or a baseball stadium. So a tier is defined as an east-west row of townships. Remember you saw this brass head at the intersection of the Heel and the Salt River Basin Meridian? Well, let's take a look at this now. Here we see T1N, and here's the baseline, remember? So this T1N stands for Township 1 North. This T1S stands for Township 1 South. It's the first township south of the baseline. This R1E stands for the first range east of the meridian, and R1W stands for the first range west of the meridian. So that's what this brass head is indicating. It's indicating that we're right here on the baseline and meridian, and all of the townships in this tier would be all across the state would be Township 1 North, and all of the ranges in this range, all of the townships in this range would be Range 1 East, and so on. So let's stop and recap for a minute. The north-south lines are called range lines, and they're 6 miles apart. The north-south lines create strips of land called ranges, which are 6 miles wide. The east-west lines that are drawn at 6-mile intervals from the baseline are called township lines, and the township lines where they intersect with the range line form squares, which are called townships. So a township, remember, is 6 miles by 6 miles, 6 miles square, with an area of 6 times 6, or 36 square miles. Townships are described first by their distance and direction from the baseline, so they're either north or south of the baseline. The T designation, the township designation, is either north or south of the baseline, and then the range designation is always either east or west of the meridian. So townships are designated as Township 5 North, Range 3 West, etc. An east-west row of townships is also called you got it, a tier. So let's go a little bit further on and take one of these townships, and I'm going to use Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNS RB&M, because that's right around where I live in Tucson, Arizona. And a township, again, let's define it, is 36 square miles in area. It's 6 miles by 6 miles in size, that's 6 miles square, but contains an area of 36 square miles. And a township, by definition, has 36 sections. And the sections are numbered in this fashion, starting with the section up in the upper right-hand corner. We number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, drop down to 7, back across to 8 and 12, back down to 13, etc., 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 and you wind up with 1 in the upper right-hand corner, 6 in the upper left-hand corner, 31 in the bottom left-hand corner, and 36 in the bottom right-hand corner. So let's talk about these sections. Let's take that particular parcel. That parcel is Section 11. Section 11 where? Section 11 in Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNS RB&M. So is there any other Section 11 in that township? The answer is no. Is there any other Township 14 South, Range 14 East? The answer is no. So that parcel then is uniquely identified as Section 11, Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNS RB&M, Arizona. By definition, a section is 1 mile by 1 mile and therefore contains an area of 1 square mile. And by definition, a section, that square mile, contains 640 acres. So keep in mind that a section is 1 mile square, that's 1 times 1. It has an area of 1 square mile, and by definition, that 1 square mile contains 640 acres. Now, if we wanted to describe that particular parcel that just popped up in blue, how would you describe it? That's right, it's Section 22, Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNSR B&M. How about this parcel? You've got it. That's Section 29, Township 14 South, Range 14 East, etc. There's no other Section 29 in that township, so that parcel has been uniquely described. Now, a township 6 by 6 is pretty hard to get our arms around for size. A section, however, is something that we can probably get our arms around because we oftentimes drive around sections. So let's take a look at a map of a portion of Tucson, Arizona. This is actually Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNSR B&M. Now, this is one of those maps you can buy at any bookstore, and you see up here it says Township 14 South, Range 14 East. And take a look carefully in blue. Right in the center of each of these squares, you'll see a number in blue. There it is. That's number 4. There's number 5. There's number 6. These squares right here are all sections in this township. And you can notice here, where we are here, this is Grant Road in Tucson. Our office happens to be right up here. This is Grant Road, and this is Alvernon. And our office building, where our school is right here. This happens to be Randolph and Reed Park, right in the center of this particular township. So, most of the streets in Tucson and Phoenix and many of the other cities in Arizona are laid out along these section lines. For example, as I mentioned, there's Grant Road. Well, what's a mile south of Grant? Well, Speedway. What's a mile south of Speedway? Broadway. What's a mile south of Broadway? 22nd Street. How about Alvernon? From Alvernon going east, you have Swan Road. Going west 1 mile, you have Country Club. Another mile west of that is Campbell, and so on. So Tucson and Phoenix are largely laid out along the government survey grid, along these township lines and section lines. So let's go up to Maricopa County for a minute. Here's an outline of Maricopa County, and there's the baseline. There's where the baseline runs through, and there's where the meridian runs through. And let's pick out that particular parcel. Let's look at it. How did I get that? Is that right? Did I do that right? Township 1, 2 north, range 1, 2, 3, 4 east of the meridian. So that's Township 2 north, range 4 east. Now, you really have to be careful if you work in and around Maricopa County because you could be over here on the west side of the baseline and meridian, and these would be all Township 1, 2, 3 north, but range 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. west. Similarly, down here, you'd be townships so many south and ranges west, and over here, you'd be in townships so many south but range east. So you got to be a little bit more careful if you're up in the Phoenix or Maricopa County area when you're describing these properties by government survey description. So let's take a look at that Township 2 north, range 4 east in the Phoenix area. And what we have is we start here with Indian School Road, then go north to Chaparral, north to a mile to McDonald, north to Indian Bend Road, north a mile to Northern Avenue. South of Indian School, we have Thomas Road and McDowell Road. And then if we figure we're on Scottsdale Road and we go west a mile, we've got 64th Street, then 56th Street, etc. And east of Scottsdale Road, we have Hayden and Pima Road. So again, Phoenix, Tucson, a lot of other Arizona cities are laid out along the government survey section lines and township lines. So let's recap again. A township contains 36 sections. And a section, each section is 1 mile by 1 mile, so that's a square, that's 1 mile square, containing an area of 1 square mile. Because 1 times 1 is 1. And by definition, a square mile, a section, contains 640 acres. Some of you might be wondering, why is this system? Why did I start in the upper right-hand corner and go west and then back down and back, back and forth and back and forth? Well, think about this. So when Thomas Jefferson and his cohorts invented this system, they were in the eastern part of the country and they were moving west. So they started in the east, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then they dropped down and did all the surveying and marked the corners of these sections, going back 7 through 12, and then they dropped down, etc., etc. Because they were on horseback, they were using wagons. You know what one of the hardest jobs was in a survey team in those days? It was the axeman, because they were surveying through forests, so they had to cut down trees and bushes so the surveyor could take a line of sight from one section corner to the next section corner. Today, of course, they use satellite stuff to survey properties. I remember I had a survey done on a property once, and it took them about an hour to set up their equipment to survey in this easement, which was going to be about 1/4 of a mile long. And once they set their equipment up, they were able to lock that easement in, the boundaries for that easement in, within about a half an hour, over 1/4 of a mile, both sides. Very, very, very fast. Now I'm going to bring you back to Tucson. So here we have a section. This happens to be section 29, Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNSR B&M. Remember, a section is 1 mile by 1 mile, containing 640 acres. And we're going to break that down by halves and quarters. So let's half and quarter this one, and then we're going to describe these by whether they're east or west or north or south or northwest or southwest, etc. So if you wanted to describe that parcel right there, I think we would all agree that's a half of a section. Question, which half is it? Well, it is the east half of section 29, etc. How many acres would be in the east half or any half of a section? Well, if a section is 640, then the east half would be 320 acres, half of 640. So we would describe that parcel again as the east half of section 29, Township 14 South, Range 14 East of the GNSR B&M. Now, what if we wanted to describe that parcel? Well, we don't describe it as a half, we would describe it as a quarter. And the question is, which quarter? So since it lies in the north and west portion of the section, it would be described as the northwest quarter of section 29. How many acres in the northwest or any quarter of a section? Well, if a section is 640, a quarter of a section is 160 acres. So that parcel would be described how? Sure, it is the south and west quarter, so the southwest quarter of section 29. And how many acres in the southwest quarter? Well, again, any quarter is 160 acres. Any quarter section, 160 acres. So to recap again here, before we break these down into smaller portions, you could have an east half, a west half, a north half, or a south half. You can have a northwest half. What we have is a northwest quarter, a northeast quarter, a southwest quarter, a southeast quarter. In fact, the east half of this section could also be described as the northeast quarter of the section and the southeast quarter of the section. Those two quarters would make a half. And sometimes a surveyor, different surveyors might describe that parcel in different ways. But for the purposes of the examination, they're going to give you a description and in all likelihood ask you to calculate the number of acres in that description. And we'll see how to do that more carefully and more easily in a few minutes. So let's take that northwest quarter. Watch out now, I'm going to get a little complicated. Let's take that northwest quarter and break it down into halves and quarters. So now if we wanted to describe that particular parcel, the green one, that would be described how? That is the northeast quarter. Remember, it's the northeast quarter of what? Of this larger piece here, which is the northwest quarter. So that green parcel there is the northeast quarter of the northwest quarter of section 29, Township 14 South, Range 14 East. Whew! And how many acres in that northeast quarter of the northwest quarter? In other words, a quarter section. That's 40 acres. Good. How about if we describe that blue parcel? Well, is it a half or a quarter? That's right, it's a half. But which half is it? Well, it happens to be the south half of this bigger piece, which is we already defined that as the northwest quarter. So that is the south half of the northwest quarter of section 29. Okay, if a quarter section, the northwest quarter, contains 160 acres, then how many acres in the south half of the northwest quarter? You're right, it's 80 acres. How about the black parcel? How would you describe that one? Well, it is kind of in the northwest. Yeah, it's northwest. It's the northwest quarter of the northwest quarter of section 29. Okay, how many acres in that northwest quarter of the northwest quarter? Sure, it's the same as the one to the right of it, which is 40 acres. So a quarter section is 40 acres. A half of a quarter is 80 acres. Okay, now we're going to do this one more time. So let's take that black parcel and break it down into a half and 2 quarters. So how would you describe that white parcel? Well, let's see. It is the southwest quarter. Yeah, it is the southwest quarter of this northwest quarter, the black parcel, of the larger northwest quarter of the whole section, section 29. So that would be the southwest quarter of the northwest quarter of the northwest quarter of section 29. How many acres would be in that? Well, since the black parcel is 40 acres, a quarter of that would be 10 acres. How would you describe the yellow parcel? Well, it's a half. Which half is it? It happens to be the east half of the northwest quarter of the northwest quarter. And so it's a half of a quarter, so that would make that 20 acres. Okay, enough of that. I know this can be a little bit confusing. You just have to play with it. Now, those of you who will specialize in residential real estate will come across government survey descriptions actually pretty frequently, because many of the more rural properties with homes on them will have a government survey description. But if a buyer were to ask you, is that the actual or is that the accurate legal description of my property, you'd always want to say the 3 most important words in real estate, which is I don't know, because of the fact you and I are not surveyors. So if a buyer asks you to verify the accuracy of a legal description, you'd simply tell them that they need to go ahead and hire a surveyor to do that for them. If you are involved in the sale of land or farms and ranches, understanding government survey legal descriptions is very important. And actually, many of the farm and ranch and land brokers around the state are quite expert with government survey land descriptions. If you went out into the rural areas of your community and you went along a road, most of these roads would be section line roads, and you would actually be able to find the section corners marked by the surveyors. Here's that brass head at the intersection of the baseline and meridian. We talked earlier about the townships, but now let's take a look at what this S36 and S31 means. Well, these are the sections at the intersection of the baseline and meridian. For example, S36 would be section 36 in Township 1 North, Range 1 West. S31 represents section 31 in Township 1 North, Range 1 East. S1 indicates section 1. That would be section 1 in Township 1 South, Range 1 West. And S6 represents section 6 in Township 1 South, Range 1 East. Now let's talk about what you might be asked to do on the examination with this. First of all, you might be given a description, and asked to calculate the acreage. So to calculate any acreage, you want to work from right to left. You want to work from the largest parcel to the smallest parcel. So section 24 is the large parcel that we're starting with, and that contains 640 acres. And working to the left, any quarter, I don't care whether it's the southwest quarter, the northeast quarter, or whatever, but 1/4 of 640 acres is 160 acres. And then working further to the left, the northeast quarter, and again, it doesn't matter which quarter, but the northeast quarter of 160 acres would be 40 acres. So that parcel, the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of section 24, would be 40 acres. Let's do another one. The northwest quarter of the southwest quarter of section 13. Section 13 is where we start. How many acres there? 640. And quartering, 1/4 of that is 160. 1/4 of that is 40. And 1/4 of 40 is 10 acres. Descriptions could use either halves or quarters. So let's take this, the west half of the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter of section 13. Section 13 has 640 acres. Whatever quarter, it doesn't matter. 1/4 of 640 is 160. 1/4 of 160 is 40 acres, and half of 40 is 20 acres. So if you ever asked to find the number of acres in a parcel, you don't have to worry about drawing a picture. You can simply write the description down as we've done here. Start with the large number, the section, 640 acres, and work yourself backwards to find the number of acres, quartering and halving as specified. What if you're given a diagram and asked to describe a particular parcel? Well, what you'd want to do is you always then want to work from the smallest to the largest. So here we are in section 23 somewhere, and we want to describe that blue parcel. Well, that is, let's see, that is the, what do you figure here? Oh, that's the northeast quarter. Yep, sure is. Of what? Of this larger parcel here, which is that is the southeast quarter of this larger parcel here, which is that's section 23. So that blue parcel then is the northeast quarter of the southeast quarter of section 23. On the examination, it's very unlikely that you'll be given a diagram and asked to describe it. We don't typically see that. In the real world, however, you might be given a map, you might be looking at a map and want to describe the parcel. So the way you would do it is always start from the parcel itself, expand outward to the section. So how many acres in that blue parcel? This northeast quarter of the southeast quarter of section 23. Well, let's do it. Starting at section 23, we have 640 acres here. 1/4 of that is how many? It's 160, and 1/4 of that 160 is 40 acres. So we have 40 acres in this parcel. Good. So what happens when you're given a description and you want to actually locate the description on a parcel, on a map? So here we have the north half of the northwest quarter of section 23. And to do this, we want to work from largest to smallest. In other words, working from the section and then quartering or halving as the case may be. So here we are over here with section 23. And what we want to do is we want to quarter that. So which one of those four pieces is the northwest quarter of section 23? Well, I think you've got it. It's right up there. So there's the northwest quarter of section 23. And then we want the north half of that. So which one is, where's the north half? Well, sure, that's the north half right there. How many acres in that north half? Okay, let's go back over here. Section 23 is 640 acres. 1/4 of that is how many? 160, and half of that 160 would be, you got it, 80 acres. So to recap here, when asked to find the number of acres, let's say a problem says that this particular description sold for $4,000 per acre, and your commission was 5%. What would your commission be? Well, to find the number of acres, simply write the description down. Remember, write the description out. And then starting with the section, that's 640 acres, go backwards, quarter it and half it as the description describes. You'll run into problems if you don't write the description down because you're not able to write on the computer screen on the examination. So take your scratch paper, write the description down, and then quarter it and half it as the problem tells you. We all know that Columbus originally set sail with 5 ships, right? You didn't know. 2 fell off the edge, right? Well, is the Earth flat or is the Earth a sphere? Well, I think we know the Earth's surface is curved, and it looks kind of like that. And these lines of latitude and longitude, the north-south lines from the North Pole to the South Pole, are called lines of longitude, and the east-west lines are called parallels of latitude. And they're kind of like the baseline and meridian. Well, why are we even talking about this? Well, here's where we live. We live in the northern hemisphere. And if we blow that up, we can see very easily that these north-south lines actually converge towards the North Pole. So when we're trying to draw lines on a flat surface to represent a curved surface, there's always some problems. And if we were to greatly exaggerate the way these north-south lines actually converge over Arizona, it might look like that. Again, greatly exaggerated. So what we need to do, and what the surveyors have done, is every 24 miles from the bottom of the survey, from the southern portion of the survey to the northern portion of the survey, every 24 miles, they would actually draw a line, east-west line, and create a square parcel called a check. And a check is 24 by 24. And in this particular check, which will contain 16 townships, they're going to take one of those townships and they're actually going to correct it or adjust it. And actually, at every 24 miles, the range lines get slightly offset in order to be able to correct for the Earth's curvature. Now, we don't have to we don't have to be surveyors. We don't have to know exactly how this is done. But just keep in mind that every 24 miles north from the southern portion of the state going north, that there's an adjustment made in some of the townships. And these townships in which there are corrections made are called correction townships, and they contain what we'll call 25 standard sections. In other words, 25 sections, each of which has 640 acres, and then 11 what are called fractional sections, which lie along the north and west side of this correction township. So the sections along the north and west side of a correction township are what are called fractional sections. And these sections may have more or less than 640 acres. On the exam, you'll never be asked to know about the number of acres in a particular fractional section. We just have to remember 640 acres in a section. But just understand that certain sections in these correction townships are adjusted and may contain more or less than 640 acres. Here's a map of Arizona which shows all the townships and ranges with offset range lines because of the curvature of the Earth. Now, I know you can't see the offset, so let's take a look at around Tucson and look at these range lines. Whoops, right here at the Pinal-Pima County line, they get offset. Whoops, here they are as well, offset. Look over here, offset, offset. So these are offset. This is basically a check line here, and they're offset in order to bring the range lines back into parallel because of the Earth's curvature. Well, let's go up to Phoenix area. Here we are in Phoenix and Glendale, and look right here. Along this check line, here's another check line, you see right over here that the range lines jog again in order to adjust for the Earth's curvature. Here we have a map of the United States which shows which states or which areas use the government survey system. And you can see that over here on the eastern seaboard, the 13 original states plus Kentucky and Tennessee, they don't use the government survey system. Why? Well, because of the fact that this land had been used and fertilized and farmed and ranched since the 15 and 1600s. So the descriptions typically over here are metes and bounds descriptions. Also, Texas, at one time, of course, Texas was its own country, the Republic of Texas, so they don't use the government survey system at all. But when Thomas Jefferson and his cohorts invented this particular system, a grid system, the first areas that they were going to do surveys in was in Ohio. And in fact, the state of Ohio has 7 different surveys in it. But look out here. Here's Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and a portion of Colorado, all within one survey. Here's Arizona. We only have this one survey, except that right up here, as part of the Navajo Reservation, there's another survey. But we don't really deal with that because we don't sell property on the Navajo Reservation. Take a look in California. We have 1, 2, 3 surveys, 3 different surveys in California, the main one also including Nevada. Alaska also uses this government survey system. Hawaii does not. So wherever you go in the United States, in a large portion of the United States, this government survey, this rectangular survey system is widely used. So that does it for our discussion on legal descriptions. This is brand new to most of you, so it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of practice. We'll do a little bit more in vocabulary and in one of the math sessions. Remember the conversions. Remember a township is 6 by 6. They're containing 36 square miles. A section is 1 mile by 1 mile, 1 square mile, containing 640 acres. Remember that a mile is 5,280 feet. All of these are part of this grid system, this rectangular survey system that was set up back in the early 1800s. So play with it, have fun with it, don't fret about it too much. There might be 3 or 4 questions on your examination relating to land descriptions as a whole.